Okay, welcome everyone. I'd like to take this moment to welcome you to Owning It, how employee stock ownership plans or ESOPs power companies that grow faster, last longer, and build shared prosperity. My name is Gina Vero, and I am the Associate Director of the Edwardson Social Entrepreneurship Program at the Rustandy Center for Social Sector Innovation here at Booth, where I lead programs, engagement, and experiential learning in impact investing, sustainability, and ESG. This year, the Rustandy Center is thrilled to celebrate our 10th anniversary as the social impact hub at Chicago Booth for people committed to tackling complex social and environmental problems. And we're proud to be part of the university's social impact and entrepreneurship ecosystems. By promoting innovation, launching social ventures, and convening thought leaders and practitioners, the center develops the people and practices that can accelerate social change. One of the many ways that the Rustandy Center puts these into action is by co-sponsoring programs like this one focused on ESOPs. The center is excited to help highlight innovations with impact finance, and employee ownership is a fantastic example. We're very proud to co-sponsor this discussion around bringing opportunities for prosperity across all levels of an organization. And now I'll turn it over to Kelly Thompson to talk about Booth Impact Investing.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Just a quick plug for Booth Impact Investing, which is also co-sponsoring this event. We're a student-led organization. We're very much focused on impact investing, hands-on experience, and thought leadership for the Booth community. We're an organization that crosses all programs, full-time, weekends, part-time, etc. So if you're not currently a member, please reach out to us. Feel free to go to any of our LinkedIns of all of the managing partners and co-chairs and ask questions. But we're hoping that you enjoy this event, and I'm going to pass it over to Michael to introduce the panel and really get us started.
Thanks so much, Kelly. Welcome, everybody. I'm so glad to have you here. My name is Michael Zimmer. I'm an MBA student in the Booth Evening Program and a founding board member of the Illinois Center for Employee Ownership, a nonprofit that does outreach and education about all things EO. We have a terrific panel for you tonight, and we're going to drop into the chat Mary Jospehs, Carey Chen's, and Jerry Randich's bios so you can get a sense of who they are and the great experience they bring. And if you have questions, please submit those in the chat, and we will get those asked for you. We'd love to have your participation, and we know we're going to get some great questions, so please do. We will work it in. We decided to start this event with a definition of an employee stock ownership plan, or ESOP. Now, not everybody knows what that is. And even though there are almost 14 million US employees participating in an ESOP today, but it's not a known structure for a lot of folks. So here's what it is. An ESOP is an ownership structure that holds a company's assets in trust for its employees. Employee shares vest in their accounts over time. So each year those shares are priced and their account grows, hopefully. Essentially, it's a retirement plan. Employees are paid out at their share value when they retire or leave the company. So they can't sell the stock, just at any time. But they do have this accruing value in their accounts. So there's a lot of benefits and some complexities that we're going to discuss today. But at a high level, an ESOP allows employees to be owners and to have an ownership share of the value they create. Now, I want to direct our first question to Mary Jospehs. Mary, can you tell us a bit about the research that your firm Verit Advisors recently did and what that research revealed about ESOPs?
Sure, Mike, thanks. The two things that I think are most prevalent are, one, the why private business owners are first looking at or attracted to ESOPs. And the first attraction is the tax advantages. So it's the fact that you can sell your stock to an ESOP and permanently defer capital gains. Very interesting in any state, particularly a high tax-paying state like California. The second is that there's a potential ESOP structure where the company itself is exempt from federal income taxes, where they pay no federal income taxes. So that's pretty interesting. However, if there is not above and beyond that a sentiment of really liking the idea and the culture of employee ownership, of allowing the people who helped grow the company participate in the future wealth creation of the company that they're working at. Generally, those companies without that cultural component or aspiration end up pursuing a different alternative than ESOPs. The second finding, which segues nicely to our panelists here, Carey and Jerry, is that the most effective resource for business owners considering ESOPs isn't so much myself as a professional giving a webinar or a speech in Vegas last week to 2,000 people, or putting together fancy spreadsheets that show what the tax savings are, et cetera. What is most impactful is for business owners to talk to other business owners or other employee owners to get a sense of it. And at first that was surprising to us because a lot of the ESOP community tries to put information out there. But then when I thought back at it and realized that that cultural component is so important, it really makes a lot of sense.
That's great, Mary. Thank you. And that segues into the next question. Carey and Jerry, I'm going to ask you both this, but I think I'm going to start with Carey. What's it like working for and leading an ESOP?
Sure. Thanks, Mike. So for me personally, I'm currently chairman of the board of Roberts Hawaii. Roberts Hawaii is the largest ESOP in the state of Hawaii, and they focus on a variety of different, I would call them maybe hospitality type businesses. So it could range from transportation to hotels to entertainment, to name just a few. And, the employee owners there really take pride in working for Roberts Hawaii. I think the ESOP has been maybe an accelerant for that company's growth over the years. And it's always kind of discussed, like when someone goes to Hawaii, oftentimes they might be saving like their entire life for a chance to have a destination vacation or wedding or other event to go. And the employees just take that so seriously, right? If someone is willing to save up that much to be able to go, then the employees as owners also of Roberts just do everything humanly possible to make that an outstanding experience for them. So it's really just, a reflection upon themselves, and then just being aware that when people do vacation in the state of Hawaii, what it means to them, and just watching them go the extra mile, the extra distance for those guests is, it's really, really remarkable. And I think the ESOP has a large part to play in that.
So Jerry, how about you? What is it like? Can you tell us a little bit about your work with Amstead Industries and what it's like working there and being a leader there?
So Amstead Industries is a leading manufacturer of multiple diversified products, generally made out of steel for mature industries like the railroad industry, the automotive industry, the cooling and evaporative industries, and the freight trucking industry. So business spaces that have been around for decades and over a century. So we have a plethora of stable products, and we're in market leading positions. But I've been with Amstead for 35 years, and I grew up in a finance role, and currently I'm the vice president of supply chain. But I would echo Carey's comments about culture. Culture in the modern business world is a lot more important than what it was when I started working 35 years ago, right? People were making decisions on where to work over a $5,000 a year difference in pay. And now when I interview candidates for various roles, whether it's finance or supply chain, one of the first questions I always get is, what's the culture of Amstead? What's the culture here? And that's like a real great leading question, because I always answer it the same. As an ESOP company, we're a big business. We're a $4.5 billion revenue business. We're very large, yet it feels like you work for a family-owned business, right? since everybody has equity in the company and everybody shares in the growth of the value of the company, everybody has an interest in it performing well. So you can almost say on a daily basis, people are trying to save money or they're trying to grow the business because they know that that improves the value of their own wealth. And it creates a camaraderie that we're all there for the same goal. You know, I'm gonna jump forward and share a story that I shared with you on a call a couple of weeks ago. But when interviewees ask me a question about culture, I often go on a 15 or 20-minute tangent, and I always give an example that whenever I get a resume from somebody that has worked at a large corporation, and I'm going to pick on Navistar. I don't know if anybody works at Navistar, but they're a local company here. But I'll take their resume, I'll see Navistar on it, and I'll quickly turn around and throw it in the garbage. Because I know that people that come from those types of environments work in silos, and they work in a very non-corroborative type of environment. And we pride ourselves at Amstead in having an environment and a culture where we're all working towards the same common goal, and we all wear many hats. We get involved in different areas of the business all the time.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. I wonder, Jerry, do you think is it a situation? How does Amstead build that culture? Is it you say, hey, you're owners, and you sort of wave that ownership wand? Is that enough, or do you have to do something a little more than that?
No, a lot of it's education. I mean, when I first started at Amstead, I didn't even know what ESOP stood for, right? I mean, it was, we went ESOP 2 years before I started the company, right? So it hadn't really become anything yet. It really didn't start taking off until about 5-7 years into it becoming an ESOP. But a lot of it's education. I mean, we really, really push education on how the ESOP works, how your equity is calculated, how the volume of shares that you get each year is calculated, and how the share price is calculated. I mean, there's a formula. You know, we don't have, since we're not a publicly traded company, we have a third party that comes in, evaluates our financials, and stamps a number on our stock and says each quarter, this is your new stock price. So people learn. Generally, they don't know the exact formula, but you know, I've got models built that I can guess it within 5 or 10% each quarter. So you know what drives that stock price. EBITDA earnings and cash flow drive that stock price. So we educate our people on how to generate EBITDA, how to grow EBITDA, on how to generate cash flow. And we had a CEO of Amstead by the guy by the name of Bob Ream from 2001 to 2017 that he created a program himself, along with the vice president of human resources of Amstead, of an ESOP training program. And he forced every president and vice president of finance and VP of HR of each division to get out and present it to every owner of the company. Because Bob Ream would say, there's not a person in this company that I can walk up to, whether it's on the shop floor or an accounts payable clerk, that I can't talk to them for 3 minutes and tell them how they can increase the value of the ESOP. And I want you to communicate this message to every employee, and I want you to do it quarterly. So people understand the math, and when they understand the math, it creates, it's an elephant rolling downhill on roller skates at that point.
That's great. Mary and Carey, I was wondering if you could each weigh in. Could you share with us a personal experience that you've had working in culture or just around employee-owned companies that was positive, challenging, or otherwise? Maybe, Mary, if you want to go first, and then we'll go to Carey.
Sure. One of my favorite stories along this lines is with just an industrial company here in Chicago that became 100% employee owned. And one of my favorite things to do in my job is just to tour companies and shop floors. And ESOP companies are different. You know, the leadership is stopping and asking one of the assembly workers like how their family is, or is their sister better, or things like that. There's an intimacy, engagement, and sincerity about it. But about 6 months after we closed the ESOP, we went back to visit and sort of celebrate and ask them how it's going. And as we're touring the floor, the ops executive points to, the invariable waste bin at the end of a line that used to be filled with scrap metal and such. And he said, see this? And it was empty. And he said, before the ESOP, that was full 3 times a day. So it's these little things. And Jerry, you're so right. It's a lot of little things that make the difference, that create the performance that statistically outperforms their peer groups.
Yeah, Carey, I want to throw that to you as well. That's great.
Sure. So I think we all have heard the terrible news on August 8th. There was a very large fire in Maui, the worst fire in 100 years, right? So for that part of Maui, I think 2,200 structures were burned down, and I think 7,000 people were left homeless. So, it's interesting because culture is used a lot to describe ESOPs, and there's lots of definitions. And I think in business school, you're always taught, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So culture is the foundation for your company. Another definition that I've liked is culture is what happens when no one is looking, so in that particular instance, we had employee ownerships on the island of Maui. Management could not reach them during the times of the fire. Communications were down, and but just the strong ESOP culture of the company, the employee owners did the right thing. They loaded people on buses. They evacuated them to safety without being told. I think of all the assets that we had on that island, I think only one perished. The other assets were driven out by the employees. They just did the right thing because they felt that the assets were their own assets, but they also did something beyond that, which was to take care of the community that had always taken care of them. So when you talk about culture and the positive things, I'm using somewhat of a challenging example here, but I think, what happens in the most challenging examples and what you do during those times is the real litmus test of how strong your culture actually is. So I would say in this case, that really strong ESOP culture for Roberts Hawaii was just amazing, to hear after the fact. And obviously from my perspective, my role, my number one concern was for their safety. So obviously very happy that they were safe and their families were safe. But everything else that I said above and beyond that was just gravy to the story.
Really appreciate that, Carey. It's powerful, and yeah, I hope everybody is getting back to building and all of that. I know it's just a devastating situation. We have a question from the crowd, and I want to take this opportunity to also ask for more. Please go ahead and chime in right there in the chat. We want to hear your voices and get you involved. This question comes from Will, and it is, can you tell us a little more about what characteristics indicate whether a company is a good fit for an ESOP? Number of employees, annual revenue and EBITDA, industry, etc. So if somebody wants to raise their hand for that one.
I'm happy to go first and have Carey add color, and Jerry too. One, I would like to say employee ownership, and there's a spectrum of employee ownership that fits different size companies. So that'll be our next session, Michael. But ESOPs in particular, as a subset of employee ownership, you really need 25 to 40 employees. There's a cost to setting up a traditional ESOP. Many of the commercial banks, all the leading commercial middle market banks, have ESOP loan policies, and many of them ask for a minimum of $5 million of EBITDA. There's certainly a lot of ESOPs at 3 million of EBITDA. And when a company starts getting smaller than that, I would invite them to look at other forms of alternative forms of employee ownership for comparison. The other important thing is cash flow. It doesn't really, the most efficient way to not pay taxes is to not make money. So if there's no tax benefits, it can't fix broken business models. So the ESOP is not going to identify and train leaders and talent development. It's not going to set an operating strategy. So all those good governance, leadership, and human capital characteristics are important. It's really good for that mature business that cash flows, maybe not have super high growth, in which it would deserve a market premium, well in excess of maybe what an ESOP would pay, but have the ability to pay back the seller and continue to drive growth and share value. Carey once had me model, I don't know, I think 118 iterations of a potential ESOP. So I might ask you to add what I might have missed, Carey.
No, I think in large sum you captured it. I would probably add a pretty healthy balance sheet. There is leverage typically involved in a transaction. You don't want to be over leveraged, and obviously in a rising interest rate environment that we've recently seen, that can put some companies under distress that they otherwise wouldn't be. So you don't want the ESOP to be the reason why you increase leverage in a high interest rate environment. And then maybe going back to your prior question, Mike, about ESOP being the magic wand. I basically tell folks that if you have a poorly run company and you add an ESOP, the result is a poorly run company with an ESOP. Like, the ESOP is not a silver bullet, right? It doesn't magically get you to perfect strategies. It doesn't magically help you with a strong culture. But if you do have a strong culture, it is centered around shared rewards, or sometimes people use the word capitalism, but I think ESOPs, it's actually a principle above capitalism. It's partnership capitalism, right? So if you can leverage the talents of yourselves and each other and do so in a meaningful, focused, directional way, then I think amazing things can happen. So if you have a strong culture, right, in addition to a strong balance sheet, in addition to strong cash flows, in addition to good business plans, then I think ESOPs can really be an accelerant to growth. But again, if you are a poorly run company, don't have good operational excellence and other things, you add the ESOP. I agree with Mary. You're just adding additional costs to your structure and an administrative burden that isn't going to yield you any benefits whatsoever.
Jerry, how long has Amstead, what's been the growth of Amstead's ESOP since you've been an employee for, did you say 14 years?
I've been with Amstead for 35 years.
Lord.
Amstead has been an ESOP for 38 years.
38 years.
And it's had an average annual return of 18%.
That beats the stock market.
Yeah.
Wow. I want to throw out another question from the audience. This one is from Joe. Can you talk about where other financing, like PE firms, interact with and complement ESOPs?
Sure. This is a growing area in all the different kinds of capital that have come into the market from when ESOPs came into place in the 70s and certainly 80s. Almost all the financing was just senior bank financing and seller financing. Fast forward to the 2000s and the growth in private equity as an asset class, the explosion of direct lending, non-bank financial institutions, mezzanine funds, etc. At first, if you had asked me this 10 years ago, there was a just teeny tiny, if any, intersection between private equity and ESOPs. Private equity viewed ESOPs as complicated, not worth it, etc. But as the data has come through, and if anyone's a data geek, you can go on to the NCEO or ESCA website, and there's tons of research reports on how ESOPs consistently outperform their peer group on so many levels over decades, that it has attracted the attention of savvy investors. And of course, there's that cultural component that I think there's a greater awareness of how that drives value. So where we see private equities is buying ESOP companies that aren't performing well or maybe overperform, providing growth capital into an ESOP company to make maybe a major transformational acquisition, and the company would like to either risk share that or access more capital than they can on the senior bank market. And then we also see ESOPs and private equity on ESOP implementation, where the owner's objective is to get more cash at close than traditional bank financing can afford, and they still like the idea of the ESOP.
I think that's fascinating, and it's interesting to see the sort of growth between these two previously separated segments, I guess. Carey, I wanted to ask you a little bit about how we create more ESOPs. I think one concern has been that the number of ESOPs has stagnated over time. Can you talk about what the benefits of transitioning to an ESOP from a selling owner's perspective is? And then maybe we could talk a little bit more about the broader forces that seem to be limiting the number of ESOPs in their development.
Sure. From an owner's perspective, he or she, or perhaps the family, might be looking for a little bit of liquidity. I think a lot of companies might consider going public, if you're large enough to do so. They may consider private equity. It could be a strategic sale. As Mary had mentioned before, obviously ESOPs have some tax advantaged characteristics that make it very attractive to delay or defer capital gains. So you're not winding up with a huge tax bill to Uncle Sam. But I think the other thing that sometimes goes through a exiting founder's mind is what happens to my company the day after I sell? Are the entrepreneurial characteristics that I worked so hard for, and many times, over a lifetime to create, do those disappear? Sometimes, synergies can be a good word. Sometimes they can be a bad word, so if it's a commercial synergy and revenues are growing, that's wonderful. But oftentimes, the fear is I'm selling my company and my company will be impacted through a cost synergy, right? And the owner may not feel good about that. Not that that's something that you can prevent forever, like no structure is forever, as we well know. But at least within an ESOP, there is maybe that feeling of maybe perhaps more control over the short to near term, that that culture can be preserved. So when a founder or owner is selling, obviously the magic number is what's the purchase price of your company going to be? That can be reliant on a lot of different things. So ESOP may not be the highest amount that you can get. Maybe it's not the premium value you could get through a strategic, or maybe it's not the auction value, but it is a fair market value. And I think a lot of owners are willing to set aside that premium to basically, protect the culture that they've worked so hard to create over the years, and to remain fiercely independent. So I'm going to answer the first half of your question, and just out of fairness to my other participants, I'll let maybe Jerry or Mary tackle the second half.
Well, I don't remember the second half of the question.
Yeah, I forgot.
That's okay. Well, we'll get to that maybe, but I think we're on a theme. Jerry, are there things that specifically have been challenges working at Amstead that might be related to employee ownership, or are those just sort of the challenges of running a big company?
I think they're the same as running a big company. Some of our challenges are also attributes, in the sense that when you're in an ESOP, you're kind of operating in a financial vacuum. It's a self-sustaining cash flow enterprise. The cash flow that the company earns has a priority list of where that money goes, right? If you're a public company and you're generating cash flow, a lot of times you're just looking for ways to spend that cash flow, and you're looking for growth opportunities. And a lot of companies really blow that part, right? They don't invest in the right businesses. They don't invest in the right assets. And you have to have a very intelligent strategic mindset to grow successfully. In an ESOP, the order of priority in your cash flow is back to the employees, right? Because our ESOP has been so successful that when employees retire, there's a liability to those employees to pay them their share of the equity. So that means that there's less money that goes to capital expenditures for growth, right? And it's more of a self-sustaining inside the bubble, which the attribute to that is it forces us to learn to grow organically, meaning inside, right? Learning how to get more out of your equipment, learning how to, perhaps combine facilities that might be slightly overcapacitized and become more efficient and drive earnings to the bottom line. I mean, I talked earlier about education. To work at an ESOP and to understand how the value of what you provide translates into your equity value, you have to understand finance a little bit, right? And you have to understand cash control, cost control, and intelligent spending. So we have a lot of budgets, right? I mean, we run a pretty tight balance sheet, and it's very financially well run and astute. And you can't be a successful ESOP without cash flow. And you need that cash flow so that the employees that have worked there for so long, that built that equity, get that cash back. So a lot of the challenge of working for an ESOP is to learn how to operate in a bubble that's not typical, where I can just go out and spend money and buy businesses and take out more bank debt and just try to grow inorganically by M&A and investments.
Jerry, by that same token, can you elaborate on the luxury of being a long-term investor vis-a-vis some of that tension in the public markets to create short-term returns?
Can you clarify that question?
Yeah, you're investing for a return on a retirement plan 20-30 over 20-30 years.
Yeah.
You don't need to see that return on your investment next quarter or next year.
Yeah, it's more about, it's you can have patience. I think is what you're asking. Yeah. Well, I turned 55 a couple of years ago, and once you turn 55, you can start getting into your ESOP equity. So my patience that I had when I was 35 isn't quite what it is now, but if you're a 25, 30, 35-year-old employee and you're fairly new to the company, and you see the track record of what Amstead has done in the past, you can project where it's going to go. And, it's easy to be patient when you're working for a company that has kind of returns that Amstead has had internally.
Well, probably
and
all the
you say I
participants
invested, but I haven't invested a dime in Amstead, right? I have not invested a dime. An ESOP employee-owned company is all company funded. And it has outpaced my 401k that I do invest in by a huge amount.
So maybe Michael, I actually, so Mary got to play facilitator, and I will too for just a second.
Sorry,
so
Michael.
The second half of your question from before was, I'll address this to Mary. Mary, why aren't there more ESOPs out there? And what would it take for there to be more ESOPs?
This is something we think about a lot, and one of the reasons we initiated that survey to find out, what people thought about ESOPs. Are we coming at it the wrong way? Our number one obstacle is ignorance. People don't know what it is. And the market around resources for privately held businesses, looking at their legacy, their transition, is stunningly bifurcated today. So your wealth planner is doing your estate plan, and your wealth manager is managing your money. Your counsel attorney is doing your corporate counsel work, your accountant, your accounting work, your tax work. But there isn't a general process in place today for middle market business owners. So they almost have to take it upon themselves to talk to an ESOP person, and the ESOP advisor tells them to do an ESOP. Then they call the investment banks, and the investment banks tell them to sell. They talk to their commercial bank, who might tell them to do a dividend recap so that they can keep the client. And that's just stunningly frustrated for a business owner who's outstanding at making widgets or providing services for their niche, like Robert's Hawaii. It's not easy to find professional services that are truly objective and listen to your story and help you benchmark the pros and cons of different alternatives.
I think that's a really, interesting conundrum that the space faces. I want to go to a question from the audience. Chris asks, and I think you actually hit this a little bit, Jerry. There's something, but he asks, if I am an entry-level employee at one of your companies, what is your sales pitch to convince me to buy into your ESOP? Pros and cons. Maybe start with buy into.
Well, you don't have to buy into it because the company funds it. So buy into meaning emotionally buy into it, I assume. I always go to the two standard answers. The culture of an ESOP company is different than the culture of a large corporation. And I think we've covered the culture piece. And it is proven track returns that if you start out working for an ESOP and hang in there for the long term, your 401k or some ESOPs are not even a retirement plan. They allow you an opportunity to cash out at an earlier stage. It all depends on the company. Mine just happens to be a retirement plan. But I always sell them on the fact that the returns, the 10% equity, each employee, each year, say you make $100,000, each year you get 10% or the equivalent of $10,000 worth of equity. And the equity shares that you get in the business will outperform anything that you invest in personally, unless you're some savage day trader that is an anomaly successful at doing day trading. But Amstead has a successfully run ESOP will outperform the other investments that you make. And you did not make financial investment into a company ESOP. It's given to you.
Yeah, I think that's a really appealing aspect of it. Carey, I want to go back. You coined, but I don't know if this is a Carey Chen original phrase, but
there are a lot of those, Michael, by the way.
Well, you talked about partnership capitalism, I guess. Is that, I think I'm getting that right? And
Yes.
As we think about the stakeholders in the company, obviously the Booth Impact Investing Company thinks a lot about impact. As we think about the stakeholders of a company, who else do you all think is impacted by an ESOP? And who are those players, whether they're communities, customers, and what is the impact of the ESOP on these stakeholders?
Yeah, I think all of the above. The one word answer I would give is positive. I think ESOPs, I don't want to say it's like a ubiquitous trend, but at least in my experience, I've seen a lot of ESOPs focus on people, planet, profit, right, to a larger extent. All businesses, regardless of your capital structure, are reliant on your customers. But maybe to Jerry's point, if you understand how delighting a customer, right, which is the top of your P&L, leads to your final cash flows or adjusted EBITDA, and you realize that delighting that customer is superior to accelerating your share value than just simply satisfying them. If you truly, truly understand that, that's one element. And then a second dimension would be to say, well, there's so much I can do, but if I help my teammates and they help me, oh my gosh, I mean, we can accelerate that value even faster. So you want to kind of think about partnership capitalism on multiple dimensions. And if you can parlay those in such a way that they're working to the benefit of your customers, the benefit of the community, the benefit of the environment, the benefit of profit. Like, I think sometimes the profit word is a bad word for people. I don't really see why it has to be a bad word if it's taken in conjunction with all the other things. But if you do all those things in a thoughtful, meaningful way, right, and apply partner capitalism to it, then 18% is a wonderful number. Yeah, but let's get to 19, let's get to 20. Like, there's no reason why we have to stop. And I think it's that employee ownership mentality that, like, there doesn't have to be a limit, right? It's based on roll up our sleeves. Let's do this together. We're all in this together, and let's make it happen.
That's great. I'm curious. It leads me to a question. I think I'm going to ask a great audience question from Kim in a moment, but there's a question about governance, I think, sometimes around employee-owned companies. So if you're an owner, does that mean that you get to say like everybody gets to decide what happens?
Maybe Jerry, you
Absolutely
can talk
not.
about it at Amstead.
No, it's, I mean,
You don't get to vote all the shares, Jerry.
yeah. Well, I mean, the only governance that I have is that I've got a lot of shares and I have more voting rights in an annual board of directors election. So if, me and a couple hundred of my other buddies got together and said, we want to vote out the chairman or vote out the board, we might have enough power to do that. But I mean, even as a top shareholder, I'm still like 0.4% of ownership of the company, right? I would need a lot of friends. But as far as inside the business goes, governance, you would think we're a public company. I mean, we do, we're SOX compliant, we're compliant in all the standard public company procedures, because we are, about 20 years ago, the top leaders of the company decided that we needed to be public ready, meaning that we need to have all the internal governance policies and procedures that if we needed to go public, we could flip on a switch and we'd be ready to go. So with outside the culture aspect of it and outside the, the financial cash flow of CapEx versus paying back employees, if you take those two parts out, which are two massive, huge elements of an ESOP, but if you took those out, you would think you were working in a public company. We don't do things differently than a public company would do. We're going through the whole ESG process and sustainability. And, as a VP of supply chain, I'm going through all of the surveys for all of our suppliers to make sure that, what are they doing to be ESG compliant and environmentally friendly? No, we behave like a public company on the outside.
Well, I want to get to Kim's question, but you did bring up the ESG question as well. And so I want to ask maybe Mary or all of you, how you think that employee ownership does fit or should fit within sort of the broader ESG movement, and what innovations there might be coming down the pipe around that.
I have a late breaking news flash here on that. The S, well, I think it fits in the S clearly, squarely in the S of ESG. I'm not saying it doesn't touch the other two, but it fits in the social justice. And there's an initiative by the ESOP Association. Carey, I think I sent you the white paper on it to get ESOP certified as the S in ESG. So for companies that do government contracting or minority-owned businesses and whatnot, that the ESOP would help them qualify. Sometimes if you are a minority-owned business or Black-owned business or small business for government contractors, the ESOP kind of does not let you keep that without tremendous amount of details and work to recertify. The other you'll find, as Carey was saying, a lot of overlap between ESOPs and B corporations. On the governance side, Amstead's, of course, on the leading edge, as you always are, Jerry, with a primarily independent board and being SOX compliant. Smaller ESOP companies operate maybe not that quite formally as SOX compliant, but you'll have independent board meetings, you'll have non-gov committees, audit committees, and some oversight that will ensure that the leadership team is continuing to go about the work of growing a company and the behaviors that you need to keep a company private and keep it growing. Carey, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I think just in general, to be honest, whether it's an ESOP company or any other form of, capital structure, I think ESG is more of a headline topic today. And I think people are just realizing it's simply the right thing to do, right? There's only so much you can do with the environment that doesn't harm future generations. And it's really not fair to do so. So to be more sustainable, more environmentally conscious is just the more responsible way of running a business. But I also think that consumers are more savvy. So as they think about their product choices and they realize that company A may be an ESOP maybe a B Corp, maybe more environmentally responsible, versus a company B who aren't those things. Even if company A's product is more expensive, they'll vote with their wallet, right? Because they have that conscience that if it's the right thing to do, then I will support that company that holds those similar beliefs.
Okay, I'm going to break in with a couple of audience questions. Kim writes, related to Michael's question on ESOP transition, and as Carey mentioned, an administrative burden. How long is the quote unquote runway for firms to recognize the returns from conversion to an ESOP? That is it a safe assumption that concerns arise during the difficult transition period with culture shift, capacity constraints, where there's potential regret by stakeholders from the conversion decision?
So I'm going to give a little bit of ESOP math that makes it very powerful. Say we're dealing with the same $100 million company and they choose to do 100% ESOP, and not every company goes from 0 to 100%, but for purposes of this question, I'll use that. To finance the transaction, they borrow $40 million from the bank, and the seller has a seller note. Will get paid out $60 million over time. So you have a $100 million company with $100 million in debt. So the equity value is like 0. So what the beauty of this ESOP design for plan participants is everyday working people to get to participate in those deleveraging returns, and the companies delever faster because they're not paying federal income taxes. So that's my happy story. The company is 100 million. It's not paying taxes, so it pays down the debt usually within like 7 years. So now the stock is already worth 100, but at the same time, the statistics show that the company's growing. Not all ESOP companies grow at 18% compounded annual return like Amstead Industries, but let's just say it's only 5%. And you can quickly do the math and see how the value of the shares, the 10% that Jerry mentioned that went into your account, just escalates in value every year and compounds. So that is the magic math of being an employee owner.
Yeah, it's hard to put a number on how long it takes because it depends on the business and how strong your internal cash flow is, right? But I mean, Amstead went ESOP in 1985, and I can remember in 1990 I was working at a ductile iron pressure pipe plant in Florence, New Jersey, and there were these factory workers that were walking out the door retiring. I mean, they were retiring and they were walking out the door clicking their heels, saying that in the 5 years of the ESOP, it did a lot better than what their old retirement plan did. So, you know, Amstead was I'd say 5 years at Amstead.
Okay, we had a question on the financing and structure of an ESOP. I think Mary kind of just answered it a little bit, but the question is, do sellers' notes come into play in terms of a financing of an ESOP structure? And if so, what level or percentage is typical?
So you can say the same $100 million company, use Cliff Bar, for example, because people know that, they decided to do a 20% ESOP. So you don't have to do 100%, and the bank financed that. And in the other 100% where they want to be 100% ESOP and exempt from federal income taxes, depends on the strength of the cash flow and how much a bank will lend. You know, there's a little bit of a contraction in the senior debt world right now. So 3 times is probably a decent proxy. So the seller financing is going to be whatever the delta is between something like 3 times and the value of the company. The seller will get paid out. You know, usually the bank comes back at you in Carey, like 3 years, and wants to refinance the seller debt. The seller will get paid out with interest income on the seller note, and generally there will be warrants on the seller note too, so the seller can continue to participate in that equity growth in the company.
Yeah, I would say, you know, just like any good attorney would say, the answer is it depends.
Yeah.
You know, because you can have senior debt, you can have mezz debt, you can have You can issue bonds. You can have seller promissory notes. You can have different interest rates across all those different instruments, if you will. Then there's the question of time, so it's really, it can be as complicated or as simple as the parties involved want to make it.
We have one more question from the audience, and it's, to your point on valuation, how do you see these firms operating differently than privately owned firms in terms of pursuit of returns? We've touched on this a bit, but if there's anything else somebody would like to add about that.
Just to focus on cash flow, I mean, you've got a lot of non-financial people at Amstead in operations roles and sales, commercial roles, purchasing roles that know what EBITDA means. How many people can tell you what EBITDA means that don't work in finance? They can tell you what days sales outstanding and days inventory outstanding and days payable outstanding mean, right? Because EBITDA plus working capital changes equals your cash flow, less whatever CapEx you have for your business. And you've got a lot of people at Amstead that are not in finance roles that know how to calculate EBITDA, and they know how to calculate those three working capital or those working capital calculations. But those are the driving forces of Amstead. Those are posted on the walls.
In the boardrooms that I have the privilege to talk to around existing ESOPs, Michael, to another sort of prism or perspective of that question is, once you've paid off all the debt, right? How do you continue to grow? Because if you want to stay private forever, be an evergreen ESOP, you strategically need to grow faster than your expenses. And right now, being an inflationary environment is a good example. So again, the employee ownership, as Carey said in the beginning, isn't, it's not going to fix a bad business model. It enhances good business models, but there's a requirement for leadership identification, talent development, human capital, and operating strategy.
That's the challenge that I turned into an attribute. It forces you to spend wisely and to invest wisely. If we have a capital project for new equipment, it goes through a pretty rigorous process to ensure that it's got the return on investment, right? And that's a culture. I hate to use the word culture, but that's a mindset in the culture of every dollar I spend has to have a return, and that alone creates a rolling effect of improved financial prudence.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that seems like such a powerful mechanism to get everybody rowing in the same direction. Okay, guys, we have 4 minutes left. And so in that last 4 minutes, I was hoping that each of you might provide our audience, which is, I don't know if it's mostly MBA students, but if you think about, generally speaking, MBA students or the audience at large, what are the most important takeaways that you wish they would come away with from this discussion, or ideas that you hope they take home with them as they go into their night this evening? Carey, do you want to start?
I'll just be a broken record. I mean, we'll just focus on partnership capitalism, however you can do it. ESOPs are one way of doing it. There's different forms of employee ownership. Some are long-term focused, some are retirement focused, some are short-term focused. So ESOP is a method, profit sharing might be a method, incentive stock options are a method, synthetic equity is a method. There's lots of different methods out there, right, to share the wealth, spread the wealth. So despite the fact that I think we've talked a lot about ESOPs today, right, when you think more broadly about partnership capitalism, it's really creating an incentive for a large group to add value and win together and share in that benefit. So that would be kind of my takeaway is, don't think of employee ownership as only ESOP. It can take on many different shapes and many different forms.
My takeaway would be that employee-owned companies are fun to work at because you all feel like you're part of the same. You're all part of the same team. You're all part of the same, culture. You're not working in a silo. Another small challenging piece is that because we're so cash flow driven, is we don't just throw labor at our problems, right? If we have anything we're working on, we don't hire a lot of labor and salaried people to throw at it, right? Because we're so financially prudent. So what that turns into is you work a lot of lateral stuff, right? When I was in finance, I was in operations, I was in purchasing, I was in sales, I did international jobs. You get to wear a lot of hats, and it's a lot of fun. You get a lot of lateral responsibility beyond just your normal profession.
Wow, you guys, thank you. I'm going to add to Carey's and just say broad-based. And the research that's been out there, when there's a broad base, that means including everyone in a incentive program. These companies outperform their peer group. So whether you're going to be, do something in social venture or new or other, please think about that. And the second was, I was in the executive and the EIR day at Booth one time where they had like small group meetings with executives. And during the lunch, one of the executives from, I think it was GE, came into the lunchroom and he's like, why doesn't anyone want to go into manufacturing? These are great jobs and great careers. And you learn a lot about leadership and strategy and all these things. And, Jerry, I guess it's not hard to do 1.18 compounded on $10,000 a year for this group of students. I would encourage you to think about working with an employee-owned company or in the employee ownership world. It is so deeply gratifying.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. This distinguished panel is really incredible. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us. Thank you to the audience for your questions and for your engagement here. We really appreciate it. I want to thank the Rustandy Center, Booth Impact Investing, and the Illinois Center for Employee Ownership for sponsoring this event. Hope you all have a great evening. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thanks, Al.
Thank you.